Hello everyone and welcome to the Melbourne Traditionalist podcast episode 94. I'm Mark Moncrieff from Upon Hope and I have with me today Mark Richardson from Oz Conservative. How are you, Mark?
I'm well, thank you. Good to be here.
It's good to have you here. Now, the topic today was suggested by you, so I hope you have a lot to say on the topic. But on the right, we've talked about this a lot. Feminist scolds, and it's good to actually have a title for it.
Yeah, look, the phrase just very forcefully occurred to me lately because after many decades of feminists criticising men for all sorts of things, what is it now, mansplaining and manspreading and failure to do emotional labour and all sorts of very sort of minute imperfections on the part of our sex, it just occurred to me very strongly that it's like, in a political sense, being scolded.
It is, yes.
And, maybe to some degree, it is that aspect of female nature coming out in the political universe, and just, being expressed as scolding. And I guess, look, the fact that occurred to me so strongly, maybe I'm just so sick of it that it's reached a point where you just take it personally in that sense.
Well, have you ever considered that you're the only one who's sick of it and everyone else is really happy with it?
Oh, absolutely. And, that's why men pay good money to go listen to feminist scolders. Yeah.
Well, a couple of episodes ago, when you were on, we were talking about this, about how the feminists are constantly finding new fault, and how they get into an area and say, we can compete, we can do anything a man can do, and then over time it becomes they pick up all those feminine traits that they say that they've abandoned.
Yeah.
The negative feminine traits, such as scalding.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I agree with you that tends to happen, that it starts out in a very girl powerish way, and we can do male things better than men can.
Yep.
But then sometime later, it's we're not liking this. Why,
it's so toxic.
Yeah, toxic. The word toxic will come up. And and then the demands that it be done differently and in ways more to their liking. But look, you can hardly just open up any mainstream newspaper or click on any mainstream website without some scolding appearing. And I don't know. Did you ever find it that it rankles? Is this?
Oh no, I'm cool with it, man. Yeah. I think even the male feminists find it hard at times to deal with, and everyone who's not a male feminist also finds it hard. I think a lot of women find it hard, this constant male bashing and the constant degradation of femininity.
Yeah.
That and that men and women's worst attributes are the ones that are constantly focused on instead of our better nature.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I was thinking about that point too the other day, that when you think to what extent within our society are there really positive things about womanhood ever really cultivated or dwelt on or displayed?
There's the bizarre thing about feminism, is that it concentrates so much on the negative aspects of being a man, but it never highlights the positive aspects of being a woman.
No.
Because the positive aspects of being a woman, according to them, are becoming men.
Yeah. And as strange as it sounds, I think that is absolutely true. I watched a film with my daughter recently. I think it was made in the 90s, and it was called That Thing You Do. So it's basically a story set in the early 60s. And what was really interesting is that unusually it did show women in a much more positive light,
yep.
At least a few of the characters. And in a way that made you feel very sympathetic toward these characters, and the women were shown to be a little bit sensitive and vulnerable, but in a more positive way, not in a carping, complaining way, but in a way that, I don't know, made you think they were feminine, and some of their sort of inner beauty was shown, if you like, which it just stood out so much because, for the reason you said, that we're just not used to it, where we're used to, women being very aggressively physical on screen and never showing that other side to themselves.
This is a slight, not a change of topics, but a tangent. But last night I watched Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which is a film from 2000, a Chinese movie. It was a very big hit at the time, and now it's pretty much forgotten. But most of the people involved with it were Chinese, but then there was one Western guy, and I was watching the making of, and he was like, we have to really emphasize, how downtrodden women were at that time, and how this woman's rebelling against the confines that women have to endure, and as I watched the movie beforehand, it's really a very feminist story about this woman who's actually got a fantastic life, rebelling against it.
Yeah.
Right? And there can be no happy ending.
No.
Right? And it ends before we get to that logical part where there's no happy ending, there's great adventures to be had, but it's all terrible. It's all going to end terrible.
Yeah.
And this is the constant theme that we see in feminism, that you've written about a lot, where, women say, well, I remember one of your older articles from earlier this year where this woman was saying, I broke up with my boyfriend. It's not because I didn't want to be loved or in a relationship. I just wanted to be independent. And you're like, you're a fool.
Yes. Here's another. We're talking about these strange currents within modern society, and the feminist scalding being one. But another one is this difficulty that people have in addressing these kind of issues. That, for instance, that desire to put independence before anything else and so on, it leads to a whole lot of women really ending up single in midlife and so on. And I would have thought it would be a topic for discussion within the culture, that the numbers of, let's be specific. So in more traditional societies, usually about 6 or 7% of people live in single person households.
Yep.
So in Australia, we're up to 25%.
Mm-hmm.
But in Scandinavia, in some parts of Scandinavia, it's 50%.
Yep.
Which is extraordinary. And we are kind of following the Scandinavian model where, the state holds itself out as an alternative to having a husband, and, the state says to women, you can rely on us, we'll support you, you can be independent, and so on. And it leads to this extraordinary rate of singlehood. And you would think this trend would be worth people noticing and talking about, and at least coming to some idea of whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but seemingly not. I find that very strange, that you can have such a major change, from 5% to 50% of single person households, and where's the cultural noise about that?
Well, I'll tell you one of the things that I find interesting and very discouraging is that men are invisible. We constantly hear about women and about how women are, there's all these single women. Well, if there's a single woman, there's a single man. But no one talks about the single man. No one talks about why they're single, about what their circumstances are. And it reminds me of the arguments about pornography. And one of the arguments that's always trotted out about pornography, which is true, and that is that that pornography reduces women to just a body.
Yeah.
You know, there's no soul, there's no personality, there's no intellect. But pornography reduces men to one appendage, and no one comments.
Yeah. Well, just to build on that argument you started with, the fact that society says, well, men can just be left to that's really sad, isn't it? That you know, our societies like to think we're so progressive and enlightened and all the rest of it, but in a way, it's an almost shockingly callous thing to say that, well, these numbers of men can just be left alone with pornography or with some kind of I don't know, some attempt to an alternative to real relationships.
Well, I guess it feeds into that liberal lie that life's all about choice.
Yeah.
And that if you're single, then you've made that choice.
Yeah.
You know, you're living your dream instead of you're living somebody else's nightmare.
Yeah.
And the other thing I find interesting about the difference between single men and single women is that single women tend to be well-to-do and intelligent. They tend to be the women who would have married high-class men 50 years ago, and the men who are in the same position they're not necessarily less intelligent. I think that there's a broader range there, but it tends to be the working class men.
I've seen statistics on this.
And,
yep.
So you have these two groups who would never marry each other, even in normal circumstances, even in a traditionalist society, they wouldn't marry each other. But what's happened is the men from the higher classes are marrying women of lower class, and there's no one for the lower class men to marry.
Yeah, and if anyone's doubting this, there's a paper being released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics which confirms what you just said, that if the wealthier and the more educational qualifications you have as a man, the less likely you are to be single in middle age.
Yeah.
But for women, it's the other way around. That the higher the qualifications and income of women, the more they're likely to be single. So yeah, that dynamic's happening, and you can understand why it's happening too. That it's that hypergamy thing, isn't it? That usually women will be attracted to men who are
they're attracted to male success.
Yeah. So you have to be a little bit higher on the success scale, however that's measured, for them to respect you and want to marry you. And that's not a hard and fast rule, of course, but it works as a generalisation. And
to be honest, I think it's more than a generalisation.
But the logic of it is exactly what you said. That then means that the women that those upper class men might once have married will be too high up in the pecking order for that to happen. So those men will go down. In terms of social status or whatever.
Yeah, you definitely.
So that's a really big issue, which again nobody really talks that much about. Not in the official media anyway. Gets talked about a little bit in what used to be called the manosphere, I suppose. But
even there, the men are superfluous to the argument. And they probably take it a bit too far, and they blame it on the individual women.
Yeah.
Instead of on a society, a civilizational-wide problem that we have. I was reading, I can't remember whether this report was from 2019 or 2018. I wrote about it on my blog, but there was a report released on unemployment in Australia. And most people think of unemployed people as being young, but the average unemployed person is in their late 40s in Australia, and 80% of them are single.
Yeah.
Because when you're unemployed, well, you can't get anywhere with women.
Yeah.
Not for a long time, maybe for a short time.
Yeah. And again, it's this really difficult thing for a liberal society to deal with, because if you go back There was a time when, if there was a shortage of jobs,
Yep.
preference would be given to a man
Yep.
on the basis that he would then be able to support a family.
That's right.
That was the logic to it. But that would make some people's heads explode today because
Yes.
of equality.
Yeah.
That
And instead we have, women being told, oh, you can get your eggs fertilised. Frozen. So they can be fertilised at a later date. I mean, that's a horrifying idea.
Yeah.
But apparently a lot of people are like, oh no, that's logical.
That's right. And an even more common one is just the women going it alone and buying.
Well, those women
sperms.
are going to be alone, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's just it's a built-in difficulty within the whole way it's organised now, and the system keeps doubling down on itself too. It's always, well, we're not equal enough yet, so we've got to push it harder. The latest suggestion is that women be paid more superannuation than men, so effectively having a higher wage, which again is just the same problem, that instead of looking to a husband to provide material security, the idea is that women will just be independent and the state will look after them, or the employer. And it's not, for some women it can work. They can become well off materially, but for a lot of those women it won't. It's not a very good option.
Well, that's right. And you actually meet a lot of these women and you find out that they're in debt.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that people forget about the traditional marriage, is that men make money, they bring resources into the family, and the woman spends those resources, whether it's money or whatever, and that's actually her natural job. It's not her job to make money, it's her job to spend money. And so women are very good at that, and it means that they keep doing it even when they've got their own jobs, they've got their own careers, they've got their own money, but there's not a man to say, hey, this is all I've got.
Yeah.
These are, the resources have stopped here, you can't keep spending.
Yeah. I read a book once by a young Melbourne woman. It was probably 10 years ago now, but she was unhappily sort of single and childless in her mid-30s. And she said she'd had all these really great jobs in her 20s. She'd been catapulted up the ranks and had this huge amount of money to spend, but she spent it all on shoes and travel and cuisine and wine, and she had nothing by the end of it.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, you can be critical of that, but
that's actually nature.
It kind of is. Like for a man, you're meant to be a provider. So the bottom line is, if you're a husband in a family, and there's no money, who's taking who's copying the blame for that? It's going to be the man in that situation.
That's right. Yeah.
Because that's a prime directive, really.
Yeah.
So it's you. So we're giving women a lot of prestige jobs and high pay, often for conspicuous consumption.
Well, and then it goes back to, who's really behind this, who's actually pushing all these self-destructive ideas, and we come back to liberalism yet again. And we also have, there's a movie from the 1980s called They Live, and the man finds these glasses and he puts the sunglasses on, and he can see that there are some people are humans and some people are aliens, and that the aliens are actually in charge. And you read the billboard and it says obey, and you read the newspaper and it doesn't have 1,000 words on the page. It will just have one word, consume. But one of the things that the aliens also told us to do was get married, have children. The aliens were more humane than the people who were in charge.
Yeah. And just to link this is a kind of obvious political point to make, I guess, but once you decide that you're not an ethnic nation anymore, once you move onto civic nationalism,
yeah,
you can get kids from anywhere, really, around the world,
yeah,
through an immigration program. So the idea that you have to take care of the family and have a birth rate, it becomes relatively unimportant to the system.
Right. Yeah.
If you look at Hungary, which still has a sense of itself as a distinct nation and wants to continue into the future, whether you agree with the programs they've introduced or not, the government has put a lot of effort into trying to encourage marriage and childbirth and so on. Whereas here in Australia, I guess a lot of people would, in terms of the system, it just doesn't matter as much. And again, to the detriment of ordinary people for whom it does matter.
And, you know, I was reading an article recently about how nativist policies don't work, which is policies that is designed to create a high birth rate. And they were talking about Hungary, and they talked about Australia. We had the baby bonus, if you remember. And, you know, it only has a very small impact. And, of course, that's because it's just one policy in a sea of bad policy.
Yep.
And the sea of bad policy is the problem. That's why we're traditionalists. That's why we oppose liberalism, is because there's just so much bad policy built into the very nature of liberalism that pushes things in a anti-family way, because everything's about the individual.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter whether the individual has children or not. That's your personal choice. And a lot of people are sucked into it. Oh, I never wanted children. Oh, when it became obvious you couldn't have them, right? You know, I've noticed a lot over the years that I don't want a full-time job. Why? Because it's too hard to get a full-time job, right? So they would say, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm opposed to the system," they'll say, "No, this is really what I want." They conform to the system.
They're adapting to
That's right.
the situation.
You know, so it's a survival mechanism, which is ultimately destructive. Because this is one of the things, going back to feminist scolding, is, again, I read something where, you know, women got the vote because their wives scolded them until they supported it.
Yeah.
So to get a bit of peace and quiet, they said, all right, I'll bring in this radical change. So what that means is that all of us, even those who don't have wives, don't have girlfriends, we still get to be scolded.
Yeah,
because
true.
Because these men were too weak.
Yeah. No, that's true though, isn't it? That you now get scolded regardless of whether you get the benefits of the marriage or not. You still publicly.
Yeah. So we all have the disadvantage of marriage without any of the advantages.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, not everyone, but for a lot of us.
Yeah. You made a good point before about the nativist policy is not working, and it's kind of, and I agree 100% with you. It's predictable, because if you have a system which tells girls from very early on that you know that the gold standard is careerism and to compete with men, and that marriage and family will be a hindrance to you, and so on.
And you can get pregnant when you're 40.
Yeah,
or 45.
That's right. Correct. They get told this. And that you should be a party girl in your 20s and all of that, then you can say to these women, well, here's $1,000 if you have a kid, but it's not really, it's a little bit of an incentive in this huge, as you put it, sea of disincentive. And, you know, if people thought that they were fulfilling themselves at a very deep level through service to family and so on. I mean, that's how you get to a better situation in terms of birth rates and marriage rates, and rather than through... They're using the techniques of economic man, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
that's what we've all been reduced to, isn't it?
And this is something that is much greater than economic man, and it has to do with how you conceive of the ultimate purposes of life and how you fulfill yourself at the deepest level, and where you see the good and how you serve the good in life. It's those things that really matter, not some more superficial idea about economic man.
And that's right. And, you know, another thing is that, you know, traditional society always understood this. Young people know nothing. And today it's always presented that young people know everything. You know, they're smarter than the older people because they've got energy. Well, that's something that's never been denied by any society, that the young have energy and they have ambition. But it's not enough. The knowledge is lacking, and more importantly, the wisdom.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that traditional society always built up. It built up that wisdom, that idea that, you know, you're always... you should listen to older people because they've actually experienced life and they've got a more mature hold on things. And now people are being told at very young ages, you make decisions for your entire life and stick with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, in the school system now, kids, very young kids really, 13, 14-year-old are being encouraged to get involved in political movements. And I always think to myself, but you're 12 or you're 13. At that age, really, what do you know?
And there it is, you know, with the transgender stuff as well.
Oh, absolutely.
That's being pushed at a very young age, a quite indecent age. The people who are pushing this should be in prison. You know, but that's the thing. Target the young, mess them up, make them choose something that is irreversible.
Yeah. One thing of interest to me is, I mean, things are obviously coming apart when it comes to family life and relationships and so on, and you just wonder for how much longer can things come apart before it really starts to hit home to people.
Yeah.
I think obviously amongst some men it has.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the big changes come when it spreads to women as well, that women start to think, hey, this is not really what should be the case. That we haven't quite got there yet, have we?
Well, no, I don't think we have. And the great thing that liberalism has achieved is it actually said, hey, when you abandoned your old life, the traditional life, here's a new life. We've built a new life for you. All you have to do is just step over.
Yeah.
And we have to build that again so that women can just step over.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to step over when it's so insecure.
No.
That's the thing that men have to do. Men have to build and create.
No, that's a really good way of putting it. I agree with you. That's exactly right. This is a little bit off topic, but what you just said then, it reminds me of having watched the TV show The Queen's Gambit, about a made-up story about a female chess prodigy. And it kind of shows exactly what you said, that the two options put in front of this woman, the older one about service to family and community and so on, and the other one, the Sex and the City kind of lifestyle, the glamorous thing. And she eventually... I mean, the show is sophisticated enough not to make it black and white, but eventually she's shown stepping into the glamorous Sex and the City lifestyle kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's created for her, and all she has to do is step over.
Yeah.
She doesn't have to create it.
No. And she does look back at the old one, but she opts for this. She steps over into it. And I think you put that really well, actually, that things are more likely to change on a large scale if we can recreate something better for women to step back into. I agree.
Yeah. Well, we've got 4 minutes before a Melbourne Traditionalist meeting starts, so I think we should end it here.
Well, yeah, we don't often plug the Melbourne Trads on the podcast, do we? But we're about to have one of our get-togethers. They're always great evenings and events. If you're a local listener, maybe look up
Get in contact with either myself, Mark Moncrieff at Upon Hope, or Mark Richardson at Oz Conservative. And generally what we do is we meet up with you, have a meal, and have a chat for an hour or two or three sometimes, and check each other out, see whether our views are aligned.
Yeah, whether it's a good fit, and it often is. And the thing people say who do come to the get-togethers is, what a relief it is to find somewhere you can speak freely to like-minded people. So they're usually really good evenings, very enjoyable.
Absolutely. On that note, thank you very much, Mark, and hopefully I can get you back on the show. Actually, we've done pretty well this year.
Yep. We're up to 6, I think.
Yeah.
No, we're going well.
So hopefully I can get you back for 6 more.
Terrific.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening, and hopefully I'll speak to you again next week. Bye-bye.